If you really stop to think about how we operate in our daily lives, almost everything is built on this expectation of, well, mathematical precision.
Yeah, that is so true, especially when it comes to a standard employment contract.
Right. It operates like a very clean, very logical spreadsheet. You clock in at a specific time, you perform your duties, you clock out, and then the math just takes over.
hmm Your hourly rate is multiplied by your time, and the payroll department cuts the check.
Yeah. And it is safe. It is predictable. Worked or not worked, it is totally clean.
Right, because it operates on a binary system. You worked the required hours or you did not. The ledger reflects reality.
You can look at the math, point to the bottom line, and say, there it is. That is what I am owed.
And honestly, that is incredibly comforting for us.
It really is. We like things to be visible. We want our lives to be categorized by, measurable effort.
Absolutely. There is this psychological safety in having a ledger that proves we earned our standing in the world.
Yeah, we want a receipt for our worth. We want to be able to hold up our resume or our time card or our list of good deeds and prove that we are entitled to our compensation.
That is the baseline of human commerce, right there. And I mean, it is the baseline of human religion, too.
But then you step into the world of sovereign grace. Specifically, you step into the biblical landscape of the kingdom of heaven as Jesus describes it.
And suddenly that safe, predictable spreadsheet is completely broken.
Torn to pieces. We are looking at a theological reality today that is, well, if we are being completely honest, highly offensive to our natural sense of fairness.
That really is.
Welcome to Reformed Thinking. Today we have this massive stack of theological and pastoral commentaries sitting in front of us.
We really do. It is a tall stack today.
Yeah, and our mission in this deep dive is to unpack Matthew chapter 20, verses 8 through 16. This is the parable of the laborers in the vineyard.
It is a massive text.
It is. We are taking all these sources and distilling them to give you a clear shortcut to being well-informed on this passage. We are going to examine sovereign grace and the absolute death of human merit.
That is the absolute core of this text. And I want to state clearly right from the jump that this is not a lesson in ancient agricultural economics.
Right, definitely not.
We are not looking at secular labor relations in first century Palestine. And we are not getting a master class in how to run a farming business.
No, this parable is a direct, calculated confrontation of the human instinct to measure fairness by comparison and visible sacrifice.
Precisely. Jesus is intentionally dismantling the way sinners think about God, the way they think about grace, and the way they calculate their own standing in the kingdom.
I think we can all relate to the feeling Jesus is targeting here. Just think about being at your job, or maybe go back in time to being in school during one of those dreaded group projects.
Oh man, the group project?
You know the scenario. You pull all the weight. You stay up late, you do the research, you format the citations, you build the slide deck. You are sweating the details.
Yeah, you're doing everything.
Right. Then there is that one person in the group who ghosts everyone for 3 weeks, shows up 5 minutes before the deadline, barely contributes a single poorly formatted slide.
I have lived this.
We all have. And then the professor gives you both the identical grade, or, in a work setting, the identical bonus. The sting of that perceived unfairness is universal.
It is. You feel it right in your chest.
Your blood pressure spikes. You think, I did 90% of the work. How in the world do they get the same reward?
That visceral reaction, that spike in blood pressure you were describing is spot on. That is what Jesus wants to draw out of his listeners.
He wants us to feel that.
He does. He tells a story that intensely offends our natural mathematical sense of justice. He wants you to feel that indignation.
That is fascinating.
But to understand why he does this, we cannot just start in chapter 20. We have to look at the catalyst for the parable.
Right, the setup.
Yeah, we need to step back slightly into Matthew chapter 19 and look at the conversation that provokes this entire story.
Okay, let's unpack that context because it is crucial. This parable does not just drop out of the sky into a vacuum.
No, not at all.
It is a direct, pointed answer to a specific question from the Apostle Peter. In Matthew 19, verse 27, Peter looks at Jesus and says, "See, we have left everything and followed you. What then will we have?"
That question from Peter is the hinge for everything that follows. And, we have to remember what Peter just witnessed.
Right, the rich young ruler.
Yes, Jesus had just interacted with the rich young ruler. That was a man who came to Jesus, heard the demands of discipleship, and walked away sad because he had great possessions.
He refused to liquidate his wealth to follow Christ.
Exactly. Well, precisely. Peter watches that wealthy man walk away, And Peter's immediate reaction is to look down at his own spiritual ledger.
He is checking his own math.
He is. He essentially says, Lord, that guy kept his wealth. He protected his spreadsheet. We did not. We left the boats, the nets, the family business. We made the massive sacrifice. What is our compensation going to be for that?
And we should acknowledge that Peter really did make a massive sacrifice. He walked away from a lucrative fishing business on the Sea of Galilee.
No, absolutely.
He is not just some destitute guy with nothing to lose. He gave up a solid livelihood.
He absolutely did. But the problem is not the sacrifice itself. The problem is the calculation happening in Peter's head.
The ledger again.
Yes. It is the birth of the mercenary spirit in the disciples.
A mercenary spirit, meaning I am doing this job for the payout, and I want to make sure the payout matches my specific level of suffering.
Spot on. Jesus responds by promising a massive reward.
Ooh.
He tells the disciples they will sit on 12 thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel.
So he honors the sacrifice.
He does. He assures them that their sacrifices will be honored. But he immediately issues a piercing, severe warning right on the heels of that promise.
What does he say?
He says, many who are first will be last, and the last first. This phrase functions as a literary inclusio.
Like bookends.
Yes, it acts as a set of bookends, wrapping the entire parable of the vineyard in the theme of kingdom reversal.
Oh.
Peter's question reveals a dangerous, subtle shift in his heart.
How so?
He is starting to view his relationship with Christ through the lens of compensation, rank, and a purely transactional mindset.
Wow. It is terrifying when you see how easily religious devotion morphs into a ledger book.
It really is.
Believers start tracking their moral output. They subconsciously expect God to compensate them for their sacrifices, their time, their giving.
They want that receipt.
Yeah. It makes me think of an analogy. Imagine an employee at a massive corporation who meticulously tracks every single minute of overtime.
Okay, I can picture that.
They keep a little black notebook in their pocket. They log every weekend email they send, every skipped lunch break, every time they covered for a sick coworker.
Doing the math.
Right. They do this because they expect superior status over the newer hires. They are aiming for the corner office, and they believe their accumulated hours legally guarantee them that spot.
But then what happens?
Well, then they find out the CEO operates on a completely different system of generosity, one that doesn't care at all about their little black notebook.
That is a highly accurate picture of the legalistic heart. The danger in your analogy is not that the employee works hard.
Right. Hard work is a good thing.
Hard work is commanded. The danger is the notebook. The danger is the quiet, ongoing calculation of personal worth based on human endurance.
I do want to play devil's advocate and push back slightly on this, though.
Go for it.
Can you really blame Peter for asking the question? Like we just said, he left his nets on the shore. He walked away from financial security to follow an itinerant rabbi who had no place to lay his head.
It is a fair point.
Why is Jesus so quick to crush this mindset? It seems like a perfectly logical question for a guy who just abandoned his entire career to ask about his retirement plan.
It is entirely natural from a worldly standpoint. In fact, it is the only way the natural mind knows how to operate.
We are wired for it.
We are. And that is why Jesus has to crush it so decisively. The kingdom of heaven cannot be understood or handled through a commercial framework.
Because it ruins the relationship.
It does. If you bring a merit-based system into your relationship with God, two things will inevitably happen. First, you will become incredibly proud of your own sacrifices, looking down on those who haven't suffered as much as you.
And the second thing...
Second, you will eventually resent the grace God gives to other people.
Wow. That is sobering.
It is. To crush this transactional mindset before it destroys the disciples, Jesus constructs a highly specific scenario in a vineyard.
Taking it from theory to reality.
Right. He brings us out of the theoretical and into the dirt, to the actual hiring of the laborers in the marketplace, which happens in the first 7 verses of chapter 20.
Let's set that scene. The master of the house goes out early in the morning, right at dawn, to hire workers for his vineyard.
At 6 or...
Right. The text tells us he makes a specific agreement with this first group of workers. The Greek word used here is symphonio.
Symphonio, yes.
It is a bilateral, binding legal contract. They agreed to work for 1 denarius, which was the standard daily living wage at the time. It was enough to feed a typical family for 1 day.
We really need to pause on that word, symphonio. It establishes the baseline of strict justice.
A firm handshake agreement.
Exactly. The master and the laborers look at each other, agree on the terms of the labor, and essentially shake hands. A legal binding obligation is created.
The master now owes them a debt.
He does. He owes them a debt, and they owe him their sweat. But then, as the day progresses, the master goes back to the marketplace.
He keeps going back.
Yeah, he hires more people at the 3rd hour, the 6th hour, the 9th hour, and finally the 11th hour.
A last group is hired at 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
Right, with only one single hour of daylight left before the workday ends.
Here is where the distinction in the text becomes fascinating. For all those later groups, the master does not offer a strict contract. He doesn't.
He does not use the word symphonio. He does not guarantee a denarius. He simply tells them to go into the vineyard, promising to pay them whatever is right.
The Greek word there is dikaion.
Dikaion, right.
Let's break down the massive theological distinction happening right there in the dust of the marketplace.
It is a huge shift.
It is. The first group operates on a strict agreement. They have the psychological security of a contract. They know precisely what they're getting.
The comfort of the spreadsheet.
Yes. The later groups operate entirely on faith in the master's character. They have no guarantee of a specific amount.
They just have to trust him.
In the progress of redemptive history, this mirrors a monumental biblical shift. The first workers represent national Israel under the heavy yoke of the Mosaic Law, functioning under the Old Covenant.
They viewed their relationship with God largely through the lens of a works contract.
Right. Do this and you will live. Obey the law, get the blessing.
And the latecomers. The 11th hour workers represent the church, largely made up of Gentiles, brought into the vineyard very late in the day of redemptive history under the covenant of grace.
Put yourself in the psychological state of those 11th hour workers for a moment. They have been standing idle in the marketplace all day long.
Just waiting.
In that agrarian culture, if you didn't get hired for the day as a day laborer, you didn't get paid. There was no social safety net. There was no unemployment office.
None at all.
If you didn't work, your family literally did not eat that night. Standing there at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, watching the sun start to dip, the anxiety must have been crushing.
It would have been unbearable.
When the master finally walks up, hires them, and simply says, "I will pay you whatever is right," their reliance on his unspecified goodness is an act of complete and total vulnerability. They have absolutely no leverage.
They have zero leverage. They are beggars who are thrilled just to be allowed in the gate.
Just happy to be there.
Right. This highlights the massive difference between a covenant of works and a covenant of grace, which the Westminster Confession of Faith details beautifully in Chapter 7.
Let's talk about that confession.
Well, under a covenant of works, you have a legal claim based on your own obedience. If you do the work perfectly, the reward is owed to you as a debt.
Because of the contract.
Yes, but under a covenant of grace, you are entirely dependent on the unmerited favor of the sovereign. You have no legal standing to demand anything.
It is the difference between going into a brutal salary negotiation with a union representative by your side demanding your exact wage be written in ink in a contract,
Right.
versus the terrifying prospect of looking at a powerful boss having zero leverage and hearing them say, "Just trust my goodness, I will take care of you."
That is a brilliant way to phrase it.
For the natural human heart, trusting someone's goodness without a contract is terrifying. We want the paperwork.
It is terrifying because we know our own corrupt hearts, and we naturally project our own stinginess and our own conditional love onto God.
We think he is like us.
We assume God is a harsh taskmaster who will shortchange us the moment we let our guard down. But the master in this parable is inherently good. He is not like us.
Thank goodness he isn't.
So the workday eventually ends, the sun goes down, and that sets the stage for the most provocative, tension-filled moment of the entire parable.
We arrive at the payment line in verses 8 through 10.
Evening falls. And in biblical literature, evening is often the symbol for final accounting, for the end of the age, and for judgment.
The workday is over.
The master, the oikodespotes, commands his foreman, the epitropos, to pay the workers. But he gives a highly specific, very unusual instruction.
What does he tell the foreman?
He says, call the laborers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last up to the first.
We cannot gloss over that instruction, beginning with the last up to the first. This reversal of the payment line is not some administrative quirk.
No, the master didn't just happen to bump into the 11th hour guys first on his way to the payroll tent.
It is a calculated theological provocation.
A massive provocation. By instructing the foreman to pay the last workers first, the master forces the 12-hour workers to stand there and watch.
Oh, that is brutal.
They have to witness the staggering generosity given to the idlers before they receive their own pay.
The suspense of the parable rests entirely on this moment. You can feel the tension in the air. The 11th-hour workers step up.
They've only worked 60 minutes.
They haven't even broken a sweat. And the foreman reaches into the bag and hands them a full denarius, a whole day's wage for a single hour of work.
Imagine being one of the first workers standing at the back of that line.
I would be losing my mind.
You see that silver coin drop into the hands of the 11th hour guys, and your mind immediately starts calculating. The spreadsheet opens up in your head.
Of course it does.
You think, if the guys who worked 1 hour got a full denarius, then we, who worked 12 brutal hours in the sun, are going to get a fortune. We're going to get 12 denarii. We're going to be rich.
But think about the alternative scenario for a second. What if the master had just told the foreman to pay the first workers early in the morning?
That changes everything.
What if he just handed them their denarius at 6 a.m. right after they signed the Symphonia and sent them home?
They would have been thrilled. They would have walked home celebrating.
I got what they asked for.
They got what they needed to feed their families, and they secured it early in the day. They would have praised the master for his reliability.
Right. Their massive dissatisfaction later that evening is entirely manufactured by observing the blessing given to others.
That is the whole point.
It goes back to that test score analogy we started with. You get your final exam back, you see a B at the top of the page, and you are thrilled. You studied hard, a B is a solid grade, and you are perfectly happy.
Until you look around.
Exactly. Then you glance over at the student sitting next to you. You know for an absolute fact they slept through every single lecture. They never took a single note. They didn't even buy the textbook.
We all know that student.
And you see, the professor also gave them a B. Suddenly your B feels like a slap in the face.
It feels like an insult.
The grade didn't change. Your objective standing didn't change. But your joy evaporates instantly because of comparison.
That analogy captures the mechanics of envy perfectly. You are completely joyful and content until you are forced to look at someone else receiving unearned favor.
It is a sickness.
It is. Your happiness is tied to your relative superiority over the person next to you.
I have to ask the critical question here, though, and I think anyone listening to this is probably wondering the same thing.
What is that?
If the master is so good, if his character is perfect and he is full of grace, why deliberately provoke the first workers? Why intentionally line them up in reverse order just to rub this in their faces?
It is a tough question.
Isn't he just setting them up to be angry and bitter? It feels manipulative.
It looks manipulative only if you misunderstand the master's goal. The master is not creating the anger. He is drawing out the hidden corruption that is already festering in their hearts.
He was already there.
Right. The law, represented by the strict contract, exposes their mercenary spirit. If he had paid them first and sent them away, they would have remained entirely blind to their own legalism.
They would have thought they were fine.
They would have gone home thinking they were righteous because they earned their keep. By forcing them to watch grace being applied to someone else, the master pulls the curtain back on their self-righteousness.
He exposes the disease.
He forces them to see how ugly their hearts truly are. And this leads us to the devastating reaction in the next verses, where we see the true anatomy of envy.
The tension breaks in verses 11 and 12. The first laborers finally step up to the foreman. They put their hands out, expecting a huge payout.
They are ready to be rich.
And the foreman hands them 1 denarius, the exact amount they agreed to in their binding contract. Nothing more, nothing less.
And how do they react?
They immediately begin to grumble against the master. The text uses a very specific Greek word here, egengeizon.
That specific verb, egengeizon, carries immense theological weight.
Let's break that down.
It is the precise word used in the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, to describe the children of Israel rebelling and murmuring against God in the wilderness.
Oh, wow. So it is not a minor complaint?
Not at all. When you hear that word, you are supposed to think of the Israelites complaining about the manna, wishing they were back in Egypt.
A serious rebellion.
Yes. It denotes a continuous, buzzing, low-level revolt. They're not just experiencing a fleeting moment of disappointment. They are lodging a formal, sustained theological complaint against the master of the vineyard.
Let's look closely at their actual complaint in verse 12. They say, "These last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat."
Notice very carefully what they're not saying.
What are they missing?
They do not claim they were shortchanged. They do not say the master violated the contract. They do not say, "You promised us a denarius and only gave us half."
Right. They know the contract was fulfilled.
They know the master fulfilled his legal obligation perfectly.
Their core offense is equality.
That is the issue. Their primary grievance is centered on the word isos, equal.
They hate being equal.
They are absolutely furious that the master elevated the latecomers to their level. They genuinely believed that their superior stamina, their 12 hours of sweat, the blisters on their hands, legally obligated the master to recognize their superiority.
They wanted a trophy.
They wanted a visible distinction. They wanted the master to validate their massive effort by placing them on a pedestal above the others.
You know, from a Reformed perspective, this text thoroughly dismantles some major theological errors that have plagued the church for centuries.
It really does. Which ones stand out to you?
We have to look at the Roman Catholic doctrine of condign merit. This is the idea that human labor, empowered by grace, eventually creates a genuine legal claim on God.
Yeah, that is a big one.
It teaches that if you do enough good works, God is actually obligated by his own justice to grant you eternal life as a fitting reward.
And these workers are the perfect example of that mindset.
The grumblers in this parable are the absolute poster children for condign merit. They are holding up their sweaty tunics, pointing to their exhaustion and saying, "Look at the burden we bore. You owe us more than them. Your justice demands you pay us more."
It also completely shatters the Arminian idea of foresight.
Let's talk about foresight.
That is the teaching that God chooses people for salvation based on his foreknowledge of their future faith or their future good works.
Looking down the timeline.
Right. If the master in this parable operated on the principle of foresight, he would have looked at the 11th-hour workers and said, I am paying you a full denarius because I looked down the corridor of time and I foresaw that you would work really, really hard in that single hour, matching the output of the 12-hour guys.
But he doesn't say that at all.
The text says absolutely no such thing. They are paid equally simply because the master decrees it. Grace is intensely offensive to the natural man, precisely because it destroys human meritocracies.
It levels the playing field in a way that our human pride simply cannot stomach.
The master listens to this complaint, and he later describes their reaction with a very specific, vivid phrase. He asks if they have an evil eye.
The evil eye is ophthalmos poneros in the Greek. It is a well-known Hebrew idiom for envy, stinginess, and a begrudging, bitter spirit.
A diseased way of looking at things.
The workers' eyes are literally diseased with jealousy. They cannot look at the generosity shown to another person without feeling personally robbed. Their vision is entirely distorted by their pride.
The tragedy here is just so thick. These workers were perfectly content with the denarius at 6 a.m.
They agreed to it gladly. It was a fair wage. It would feed their families. They were ready to work for it.
But then comparison ruined it.
The moment they started comparing themselves to the idlers, that completely fair wage turned into an insult. Comparison takes a massive blessing and twists it into a curse.
Faced with this open rebellion and this diseased way of looking at grace, the master has to respond. He doesn't back down.
What does he do?
In verses 13 through 15, he delivers a definitive, towering defense of his own absolute sovereignty.
The master addresses one of the primary grumblers directly. He calls him friend. The Greek word there is heter.
Heter.
In Matthew's gospel, that specific word is used in some very dark contexts. It is often used for someone who is physically close but spiritually estranged.
Is a scary word.
Jesus uses this exact word for Judas in the Garden of Gethsemane when Judas comes to betray him. It is a chilling detail to include here.
It is a massive warning.
Yeah.
It shows that mere proximity to the kingdom does not equal a heart for the kingdom.
You can be close but still lost.
You can be inside the vineyard, you can do the heavy labor, you can be called friend by the master, and you can still be a complete stranger to the grace of the master. Your heart can still be entirely mercenary.
The master defends his justice first. He says to the grumbler, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius?
He points right back to the Symphonia.
Right back to the contract. He fulfilled it perfectly. He met every single legal requirement.
He establishes unequivocally that he is entirely righteous. No one can ever accuse God of injustice. He pays his debts.
And then he pivots.
Then he pivots and defends his grace. He asks two rhetorical questions that form the theological bedrock of this entire passage. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or is your eye evil because I am good?
Here is where our discussion must center heavily on Reformed theology. The master is establishing absolute divine sovereignty. God is a debtor to no man. He owes us nothing but justice.
We have to bring in the Westminster Confession of Faith here to fully grasp what is happening.
Chapter 3, right?
Yes. Chapter 3 deals with God's eternal decree, stating that God freely and unchangeably ordains whatsoever comes to pass. And then chapter 5 deals with his providence.
How does the parable demonstrate that?
The master in this parable is practically demonstrating those chapters. He is showing that God distributes mercy according to his own wise and holy will, not according to human metrics of deserving.
The workers just don't get it.
The grumbling workers are making a massive, fatal category error. They're conflating justice, which is getting spot on what is owed, with generosity, which is giving wildly beyond what is owed.
They want strict justice for themselves, actually. They want justice plus a bonus, and they demand that the master restrict his generosity toward others.
They want to run the books.
They want to dictate how the master spends his own money.
If you ask for strict justice from a holy God, you will receive it, but it will eternally condemn you.
That is a terrifying thought.
The first workers got strict justice. They got exactly what they asked for in the contract, and it left them bitter, angry, and estranged from the master.
Our modern culture struggles with this too.
Modern secular philosophies operate the exact same way. They demand a specific type of social fairness and equity based strictly on visible input and output. But the kingdom of heaven operates on a completely different economy.
Thank goodness it does.
If God were strictly fair, according to our ledgers, no one would receive the denarius of eternal life. We would all perish in the marketplace of our own sin.
Let me raise an analogy regarding charity to help ground this.
Okay, let's hear it.
If I am walking down the street and I see someone who is unhoused, sitting on the corner, and out of the sheer goodness of my heart, I reach into my wallet and hand that person a crisp $100 bill.
Okay.
It is a sheer gift. Now, am I legally obligated to give $100 to every single person on that street?
Of course not.
Does my spontaneous generosity to one person create a binding legal debt to everyone else in the city? If the next guy asks for $100 and I say no, have I been unjust?
Absolutely not. The prerogative of the giver is absolute. The money belongs to you, and you have the absolute right to distribute it as you see fit.
It is my money.
Right. Your grace to one person does not create a law of entitlement for another.
The master says that right in the text. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? The contrast here is between the master's inherent goodness, the Greek word agathos, and the worker's evil eye.
The master's grace is never unfair. It is simply more than fair.
That is a crucial theological distinction.
It is. God's grace is never a violation of justice. It transcends justice. The cross of Christ is where justice and grace meet perfectly.
That is beautiful.
Christ pays the penalty, fully satisfying the demands of justice so that grace can be freely and lavishly given to those who haven't earned it. This defense of sovereignty leads directly into the concluding maxim in verse 16, which brings the entire parable full circle.
Jesus finishes the story by looking at his disciples and saying, so the last will be first, and the first last.
The inclusio we talked about earlier is now complete.
He started with this phrase in chapter 19 after Peter's question, and he locks the teaching in place with it right here. This is the moral and spiritual order of the kingdom.
To really grasp the weight of this conclusion, we need to apply the classic Reformed law-gospel distinction. This is a vital framework for understanding how God speaks to us throughout Scripture.
Unpack that distinction for us.
The law commands, demands, and exposes our total inability to save ourselves. The gospel, however, announces what Christ has already done for us.
How does that framework apply to the workers in the vineyard?
The law is represented by the strict contract, the symphonio, and the grueling heat of the day. It exposes the mercenary heart of the first workers.
It shows them their true colors.
It proves that anyone relying on their own works, their own endurance, their own sweating through the scorching heat of moral performance will be left bitter and condemned. They will look at God as an unfair taskmaster who never pays them enough.
And the gospel side.
The gospel, on the other hand, announces that the denarius is not actually a wage you can earn through sweat. The denarius represents the imputed righteousness of Christ. It is given freely to the idlers who have absolutely nothing to offer, no leverage, and no resume.
Christ is the true first who voluntarily became last.
Yes, that is the heart of the gospel. Christ bore the literal scorching heat of God's wrath on the cross. He accomplished a grueling labor that we could never finish.
He did the work.
He became the ultimate last, forsaken, crushed, treated as a criminal, so that we who are spiritually bankrupt and standing idle in the marketplace of sin could be brought in and treated as if we were first. He earned the wage, and he hands it to us as a gift.
Think about how this applies to the church today. There are different types of people sitting in the pews listening to this parable right now.
There really are.
You have the weary saint who has served on the elder board for 30 years, taught Sunday school every single week, set up the folding chairs, and never missed a tithe.
They have borne the heat of the day.
This parable is a loving but severe warning to them. It warns against the elder brother syndrome. You cannot look at the teenager who just got saved out of a life of terrible rebellion and think you deserve a better seat at the heavenly banquet than they do.
Your 30 years of service do not obligate God to love you more.
And on the other side of the aisle, it addresses the latecomer, the person who gets converted on their deathbed, or the person who spent 40 years actively destroying their life, ruining their family, before finally finding grace at the very end.
This text offers them immense, overwhelming comfort.
There are no second-class citizens in the kingdom of heaven.
None. The thief on the cross is the ultimate biblical illustration of the 11th-hour worker.
The thief on the cross is the perfect example to bring up. He performed 0 deeds. He bore no heat of the day. He couldn't even get his hands free from the nails to do a good work if he tried.
He was completely helpless.
He had minutes left to live. He was a criminal, yet he received the full reward of paradise solely through the king's goodness. He received the exact same denarius as the Apostle Paul, who suffered for decades.
That reality entirely shatters human pride. It forces us to admit that our standing before God is entirely dependent on his mercy, not our religious resumes.
It humbles us all.
If the thief on the cross gets the same paradise as Paul, then human merit is completely dead.
But I know someone listening to this right now is asking a very logical question.
I'm sure they are. Let's hear it.
If the wage is the exact same, if the denarius is given to the 1-hour worker and the 12-hour worker alike, how are we supposed to view our own work then?
Why bother working at all?
Right. Why not just show up at the 11th hour? Why endure the heat of the day at all? Why fight sin? Why serve the church if the payout is identical regardless of effort?
That is the natural objection of a heart that still thinks like a mercenary. It is the question Peter was asking.
So how do we answer it?
To answer that, we turn to the third use of the law, which is detailed thoroughly in Westminster Confession, chapter 19. Let's review the uses.
Okay, the 3 uses.
The first use of the law acts as a mirror to expose our sin and drive us to Christ. The second use acts as a bridle to restrain evil in civil society.
And the third?
The third use is specifically for the believer. It is the rule of life for those who are already justified by grace.
Explain how that third use changes the motivation for the labor. How does it change the way we swing the hammer in the vineyard?
Believers do not labor in the vineyard to earn the denarius. They labor out of staggering gratitude because they already have the denarius secured for them by Christ.
The motive changes completely.
We work from a place of justification, not for a place of justification. If you truly understand what you have been saved from the eternal destruction you rightfully deserved, you do not look for the bare minimum you can do to get by.
You don't just do the bare minimum.
You run into the vineyard with joy, absolutely thrilled that the master allows you to participate in his work at all. You don't check your watch. You don't look at the other workers with an evil eye.
You are just grateful to be there.
You are simply amazed that you are no longer standing idle in the marketplace of death.
So the entire mindset shifts from, I have to do this to get paid, to, I get to do this because I have been rescued.
That is the shift.
That changes everything about how we view ministry, how we view suffering, and how we view serving others. We are not building a ledger. We are writing a thank you note with our lives.
It changes the entire atmosphere of a local church. A congregation that truly understands this parable will be a place of immense humility and shared rejoicing.
No more comparing resumes.
When a latecomer arrives, when someone with a messy past walks at the doors and receives grace, the mature saints do not view them with suspicion or jealousy. They throw a party.
They celebrate.
They celebrate the master's generosity because they realize they are entirely dependent on that same generosity.
We are coming to the end of our deep dive into this text, and I want to summarize the weight of what we have seen today.
It is a heavy text.
This parable is the absolute, uncompromising demolition of human merit. The kingdom of heaven operates on sovereign grace. It is an economy where the king has the absolute prerogative to do what he wishes with what belongs to him, and what he wishes to do is pour out staggering, unmerited favor on people who deserve absolutely nothing.
It forces every single one of us to lay down our ledgers. We cannot negotiate with God based on our stamina.
We have no leverage.
We cannot point to our overtime hours. We can only stand with empty hands and receive the finished work of Christ.
I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day. Take a very close look at your own spiritual ledger right now.
Look at the notebook.
Are you secretly keeping track of your sacrifices, waiting for God to balance the scales and pay you back for your obedience? Are you keeping a little black notebook of your good deeds?
Or can you celebrate grace?
Or can you look at the 11th-hour sinner, the person you think is the least deserving of grace in your entire community, the person whose life is a total mess, and genuinely rejoice when the master hands them the exact same reward as you?
That is the real test.
Because if you cannot rejoice in that, you might need to ask yourself the most penetrating question in this text. Is your eye evil because the master is good? You know, we started by talking about that spreadsheet, that safe mathematical calculation of fairness.
The spreadsheet that ruins us.
It is time to delete the spreadsheet.
Yeah.
You do not want God to be fair with you. You want him to be gracious.
You want the unmerited favor of the master. That is the only thing that saves us.
We will see you next time on Reformed Thinking.